I'm John Sipher.
And I'm Jerry O'Shea.
Between us, we have over 60 years of experience as clandestine officers in the CIA, serving in high-risk areas all around the world.
Part of our job was creating conspiracies, like being undercover, to deceive our adversaries.
Now, we're going to use that experience to investigate the conspiracy theories everyone's talking about, as well as some you may not have heard.
Could these be true, or are we being manipulated?
Find out now on Mission Implausible. So today's guest is Phil Robinson. Phil is a Hollywood big shot. He's a writer and director, having written and directed such classic films as Field of Dreams, Sneakers, Sum of All Fears, and involved with Band of Brothers. And he rewrote a personal favorite of mine, Fletch. But more importantly, he's a friend of ours, and for our purposes today, he's a recovering obsessive on the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. So, Phil, welcome.
It's very nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
Of course. How did it's funny, just because we know that you were interested in this. I know you've done some work like on the Cuban Missile Crisis and Bay of Pigs, and you have an interest in history and things like that. But how did you get involved in following the rabbit hole of the Kennedy assassination?
I was in college in I guess it was the beginning of college in 1967. A friend of mine was a rabid conspiracy buff, and he turned me on to Mark Lane's book, excellent book called Rush to Judgment, which was a fairly scholarly dissection of the Warren Report. And I think Lane did a real service by saying, hey, the Warren Report's got a lot of problems. There's a lot of inconsistencies, there's omissions, there's mistakes. Lane inferred that was the result of a cover-up. But he also implied, look, this could be a rush to judgment. They were told to come out with this conclusion. They worked very fast, and they ignored certain things. They covered up other things, and this was the result. A report that said Oswald acted alone. There was no conspiracy. The conspiracy theories kind of began at that point, and I was obsessed with them. They were fascinating. It was fun to talk about, that the CIA and the FBI and the Secret Service and the Mafia and anti-Castro Cubans or pro-Castro Cubans and all these people were involved in a conspiracy and somehow kept the secret all these years, I loved learning more about it. Every book that came out, I would read it, and then I would bore my friends by keeping them all night, telling them about, the hobos who were removed from the train tracks on the railroad overpass over Elm Street, one of whom looked exactly like Howard Hunt, and you can show the picture and you go, yeah, I guess it looks a little like Howard Hunt. There was a lot of cool stuff. And I realized after years and years of obsessing on this, that I wanted to believe the conspiracy theories, and that I was not applying the same level of rigorous skepticism to conspiracy theories that I was applying to the government's case. And I started looking at them in a different light, and they all fell apart. I remember the day, it was in the 80s, I was reading a new book about the assassination, and I thought, wait a second, this doesn't make sense. They wouldn't have planned it this way. And I realized all the conspiracy theories were constructed from today, looking back at this constellation of facts and semi-facts and whatnot, and you could select what you wanted and connect dots and make a scenario that made some sort of sense. But that's not how the conspiracy was constructed. It was constructed before the assassination by people planning what's the best way to do this. And if you just look at these theories from that point of view, none of them made sense. They all seemed impossible. And so Phil, I really did a whole 180 on.
Yeah, Phil, neither John nor I think I could speak for John, neither of us have gone down the JFK conspiracy rabbit hole, right? It's a whole industry. It's almost a way of life for some people, a whole outlook on how it works. So I at least am not a JFK conspiracy buff. I can't sit down, and I have, and John and I both have, with somebody who's like, well, and they're like down to the hour naming names and if this, and I can't keep up with that. But with the Warren Report, I just have a really basic question, and one that as an intelligence officer always gets me. And it comes down to sort of, I guess, the burden of proof. The Warren report says that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone and like there was no conspiracy. Is that exactly what it said, or did it say that we have no evidence that there was a conspiracy, that others weren't involved? Does it? There's a difference between, we can prove there was no one else involved in a conspiracy, which is almost impossible to, because you can never prove a negative right? It's unfalsifiable. So what exactly does it say, the Warren report? And in the world of conspiracy theories, is it that we just can't prove there's a conspiracy, definitively, or, it just makes sense? What's sort of the rationale behind this?
I could be wrong. My recollection is they were very definitive. I read the first volume. There's 26 volumes of the Warren report. And then there's the summary volume. I read that when it came out. My recollection is they were very definitive. There was no conspiracy. He acted alone. There was no second assassin. In the 70s, there was the House of Representatives had the House Select Committee on Assassinations. And they studied various assassinations, mostly the JFK one. They included a lot of evidence, supposed evidence that had come out since the Warren report, and they concluded it was probably a conspiracy. But they then said, but we can rule out the CIA, the FBI, the Secret Service, the Mafia, Cuba, Russia, and anti-Castro Cubans. They ruled out everybody who had ever been suggested as a possible conspirator, leaving I don't know who. And the reason that they said it was probably a conspiracy was one piece of evidence, which was a dictabelt. A dictabelt recording, supposedly a Dallas police officer on a motorcycle in Dealey Plaza had left his microphone open. And there was a dictabelt recording of this that people who listened to it said, I hear 4 gunshots. Based on that one piece of evidence, the House Select Committee said there was a 4th gunshot, probably from the grassy knoll, and therefore it's a conspiracy. Some years later, a panel of acoustical experts took a look at this and said, no, A, these are not gunshots, and B, it did not take place at the time of the assassination, this recording, thereby ruling out that one piece of evidence. The interesting thing about what the House Select Committee said, a 4th gunshot from the grassy knoll. Remember, the grassy knoll is where the supposed professional assassin was shooting from. Well, if he fired the 4th gunshot, he missed. So according to that theory, Oswald, the amateur, fired 3 shots, hit Kennedy twice. The professional on the grassy knoll fired once and missed. So it kind of doesn't make sense.
Well, I think, Phil, and I think we've come to the same sort of conclusion, is when you look at these things after the fact, you can put them together in a clever way, the puzzle together that makes some sense. But if you're on the other end and your job was to create the conspiracy, it ends up being much more difficult. Like, you'd have to make assumptions, that were exactly right. Like, where is this going to happen? When is this going to happen? Is this person going to be at that place? And things you can't control. In fact, in our careers, we sometimes tried to create conspiracies, and only the simplest of things tend to work because real life is complex and confusing. But I can think of a couple reasons why conspiracy theories, were built here almost out of bureaucratic issues. So the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover's FBI, did an initial 50-page overview very soon after the assassination. And Hoover himself pushed President Johnson to simply accept the FBI's report. And because Hoover did not want to open up the Bureau for criticism. They'd been monitoring Lee Harvey Oswald. They hadn't spoke with him, and obviously they weren't tracking him on the day of the assassination. And Hoover and Johnson were pretty good friends. They lived on the same street before Johnson was president. And Johnson eventually realized he did have to have a special commission, but he nonetheless pushed them to try to accept the FBI view, which I think was right. But because, trying to protect the Bureau, it was limited, and it failed to anticipate all the possible scenarios.
And I think, Mark Lane was right. I think the Warren Commission did omit certain things that they probably should have included, particularly regarding Lee Oswald's background. And my theory about that is that, as we learned from the Church Committee in the 70s, Oswald was a kind of a fringe character in this shadowy world in which the intelligence community and law enforcement and the mafia were involved in all kinds of illegal activities together. Assassinations, spying on Americans, infiltrating political groups. And I think that Oswald, when he was in New Orleans, kind of rubbed shoulders with some of this. And I think the Warren Commission felt, if we reveal all we know about Lee Oswald's background, having nothing to do with the assassination, it could bring down the whole house. So let's just put a lid on that stuff. And I think in the course of doing that, it made it look like they were covering up the assassination, when in fact they were covering up something else. That's just a theory.
Years ago, there was a reporting that had come out from in the press, but according to the agency, there was real indications that the GRU, the Russian intelligence service, was offering bounties for the killing of American CIA officers back then in Afghanistan and of U.S. officials. And we could never prove that 100% officially. And to a certain extent, that's good insofar as even if we're only 95% certain that that's true, that the Russians are putting bounties on the heads of our officers, that is arguably, that's arguably cause for war. I mean, because you have to respond to that. So you've got to have it 100%, right? We've learned that in the Iraq War with WMD claiming that it was there when it turns out it likely was, but it wasn't. If with the Kennedy assassination, with Oswald having close ties to both Cuba and certainly to Russia, if one of the theories entertained and talked about was, well, there is good reason to believe that Castro or Russia was behind this, where does that take us? I mean, that takes us on a maybe to the brink of war. And is that really worthwhile if we can't be certain? So to a certain extent, I think perhaps in their minds, and I'd like your comment on it, that you don't point fingers at Russia, at another country, the Soviet Union, it has nuclear weapons, unless you are like really friggin' certain. It is better to say he acted alone.
But in that case, you are actually suggesting a potential cover-up.
Yeah, it makes, to me, based on nothing, it does make sense. I mean, he was a Russian citizen. He was in the Russian embassy before this.
In Mexico, yeah.
The Bay of Pigs had gone down. He and Khrushchev have squared off in Vienna. The Cuban Missile Crisis. The Russians may have seen him, or some rogue element may have suggested to him that it would be a good idea for Kennedy to be gotten rid of. I have zero evidence of this, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, but how many Americans in those days were hanging out in the Russian embassy and then happened to shoot Castro?
But he was, but he was such a low-level schmuck. The fact that they would suggest, "Hey, you're the one we want to kill the president of the United States."
Well, and we know from our business, it may not have been a guy, a KGB officer saying, "Go shoot him," but a KGB officer saying, like, "If only he were gone." There's all sorts of ways short of paying him money to do this.
Man, but you were going down the rabbit hole, Jerry. All
right.
No,
the difference between that is, like, I can see that as a possibility, but it's completely unproven. It's total conjecture. I get that.
Well, and I think you raise a good point, which is that the Warren Report had good reason to tamp down any suggestion that Oswald was working on behalf of the Russians, because if they said he was, then we could be at war. If you look at
could have been, right?
Could have been.
Right.
And I think John's point, I would assume the Russians had better people than this, incompetent to pull this off. And the other thing is, if you look at the geopolitics of the time, after the Cuban Missile Crisis, Kennedy and Khrushchev had a rapprochement. They both felt that we are the only two people who pulled the world back from nuclear holocaust. And in 1963, they were working together on a nuclear arms treaty. There was actually a warming between those two men in 1963. I don't know that the geopolitics of the time would have led the Soviet Union to want Kennedy killed. because he'd be replaced by somebody who was more of a hardliner.
Yeah, but here we go. If we're gonna go down, and I hear what you're saying, it makes
Just
sense.
conjecture.
But if you're going down rabbit holes and you're like, yes, but perhaps the KGB, the CIA had been embarrassed by Kennedy, who didn't support them in the Bay of Pigs, and the KGB now thought Khrushchev was being weak. Therefore, those people could have wanted, even if Khrushchev didn't want Kennedy killed, maybe the KGB thought it was worthwhile, or maybe the CIA wanted Kennedy killed because he wasn't strong enough. So like that's why this game is so interesting, and that's why this has stayed on for 30, 40 years. Because if you take any of these scenarios, they actually have a piece of it that's very interesting. It's like, of course, they would want to cover that up. Like,
right. It's in a way, it's a little bit like the religious argument of God works in mysterious ways. It's an answer to pretty much everything. I don't know that either the CIA or the Soviets would have picked Lee Harvey Oswald, who was one of life's losers, to pull off the biggest event of the century. And there's certainly no evidence that they did.
And I think that last part is what counts. There's no evidence. You can sit around and make conjectures all day long. And as intelligence officers, that was the most important thing. What does the actual evidence say? We can have high confidence, low confidence. I mean, there's really low confidence to no confidence that as far as I can tell, that we have evidence that he was involved in hard evidence that he was involved in a conspiracy.
And I did engage in that conjecture for decades. I loved it. And I realized one day I felt I wanted to believe the conspiracy because psychologically, this may sound counterintuitive, but I don't want to believe that one pathetic, low-life loser can have such a huge, deleterious, damaging effect on my life and the life of my country.
Are you talking about Trump now?
I wasn't going to go there.
Sorry,
aren't you in enough trouble, John?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, good point. Sorry. Excise that.
I'm much more comfortable believing that something this damaging, this huge, this monumental could only be pulled off by the most powerful forces on earth. Because if a nothing like Oswald can have this effect on history, then we're hanging by a narrow thread.
Well, that's why conspiracies are comforting, right? Because it helps explain unexplainable or complicated or chaotic or random things. It's, it's putting a pattern, making sense of the random nature of life. And so,
which is why I think we don't examine them, the conspiracy theories, with the same rigorous level of scrutiny that we examine the official version of events.
That's interesting.
There's all kinds of things. For instance, the conspiracy buffs would always point to a bullet fragment was found on the floor of the emergency room in Parkland Hospital. And the official version was, that's part of the bullet that came out of John Connolly. The conspiracy buffs say, no, that bullet was planted there to justify the single bullet theory. Well, just examine that suggestion. In order to plant a bullet, you have to know in advance that you have the need to plant a bullet, which means you have to know in advance that the ballistics are going to suggest that one bullet went through Kennedy and then went through Connolly. So if you're going to prove that, the single bullet theory, you have to account for that bullet. You got to put that bullet on the floor in the hospital. How could anybody in advance know that they would need to plant a bullet on the floor?
And need to know where to put it. Like, how do they know what hallway they'd be going down? And how would they know that the right people would find it? Or, I mean, like,
the janitor just doesn't sweep it up. Yeah.
This goes back to if you're trying to set this up, it's almost impossible. After the fact, it all makes sense. Like that, if you found that fits this pattern. But if you told someone, okay, I want you, to use this bullet to make this case, and trying to arrange that would be almost impossible.
And also just the idea that you would know in advance you need a bullet fragment.
Yeah, I know.
Means you know how all the bullets are going to fly and who's going to hit who.
And where they're going to go through a body and how.
That's right. That's right.
Exactly. Did you lose friends, Phil, after you sort of came out of the rabbit hole? And did you keep all your materials and books?
I did not lose friends after I came out of it. I lost friends while I was in the rabbit hole because I bored people to tears night after night, telling them these and connecting assassination theories with the Robert Kennedy and the Martin Luther King assassination, because there were tenuous ties that people would make to that. I think I probably, I was persona non grata in a lot of rooms in the college dormitory because, oh God, here comes Phil. We're going to be up till 3 listening to these horror stories.
Phil, hasn't there been a sea change, though, in who the conspirators are? My remembrance is in the 70s, the JFK conspirators were almost all left wingers, right? It was, on college campuses and left of center, and the right of center people are like, no. And now it's the other way around, that most of them are, no, this was the industrial complex, coming down on him, and it's now the right wing that's embraced this and the left wing that's let this go or doesn't follow it so much.
That's a good point. I mean, there's always been, I think, a sloppiness in terms of who these conspirators are, because you would hear about Lee Oswald's ties to David Ferry, who was part of this anti-Castro group of mercenaries training in the swamps of Louisiana. But Lee Oswald wasn't anti-Castro, he was pro-Castro. No one ever explained why these people would be working together. I think there's just a general sloppiness to it all. And as I say, people don't apply the same rigorous level of skepticism to the arguments that support a conspiracy theory as they do to the arguments that say Oswald acted alone.
And it's interesting. On one of our other episodes, we had Michael Weiss on, who's an expert on Russian intelligence, written some books on the history of Russian active measures and disinformation campaigns, and he points out that the JFK movie by Oliver Stone was actually part of a Russian disinformation campaign. In other words, the Russians saw that we were deep in these rabbit holes and picked a conspiracy to push into different things. Now, back then, we probably didn't have the sense of this that we do now, to see how sort of beautifully evil that is, to say, oh, look at the Americans are like chasing their tails here. Let's throw something into the middle of and watch them eat each other up.
I have to say, I mean, Oliver Stone's movie JFK, I think, is one of the great movies. I disagree with his interpretation of the events, but just as pure as filmmaking, I think it's as good as it gets. I love that movie.
It's not as good as your movies, though.
It's fiction to me.
Yeah, that makes sense.
One of the things, too, that doesn't make any sense is conspiracy theorists now on the JFK event keep saying and hoping that there's one more document and it will show it, right? And how many administrations have we been through? Obama, Trump, Biden, going back to Trump again. Like, if there was a piece of paper that laid out this cunning plan, and 60 years later they would have released it, right? I mean, it would have been out there. And certainly Kash Patel, if he's going to be taking over CIA, if he has this thing, why would he not, put it out? And we've said this before, but just to be clear, some of the documents that are still being held, one of them that came out was that the reason we knew Oswald was in the Russian embassy in Mexico City is because we had the embassy bugged, and it was against Mexican law. And the Mexican president himself said, I will allow you to break Mexican law, but I will be in big trouble, and my legacy will be in big trouble if I allow this. So you must promise to keep this secret forever. But before that, people are thinking, oh, they're keeping these secrets. Oh, this has got to be the one. And then it comes out that the CIA had just made a promise on something completely different. And, we broke our promise. And it didn't solve anything. So people waiting around for this one document, the Holy Grail document, It's not out there. And if there was a conspiracy, they're dead, or they didn't write it down, or they burned whatever they had.
Right. One of the great ironies is there's so much what we think of as facts about this event. It's probably the most covered, analyzed event ever. Lots of things are true. Excuse me. Lots of things are half-truths. Some people, eyewitnesses, got things wrong. Some exaggerated just to be bigger part of history. Some people lie. Some people forget details. But there's one thing that prevented us from ever knowing definitively for sure. And that is the wounds in Kennedy's neck and the back. The doctors at Parkland Hospital saw him lying on his back with a hole in the front of his throat. Now, the Warren report says that's the exit wound from the bullet that entered his back. The doctors at Parkland Hospital never turned him onto his back. They never saw a hole in his back. So they saw the hole in his throat, assumed it was an entry wound, did an emergency tracheotomy to try to save his life. He dies. The body is shipped to Bethesda Naval Hospital for an autopsy. The doctors who do the autopsy see a tracheotomy opening in the front of his neck and a hole in the back of his neck. So they say, okay, the bullet entered the back of his neck. They never talked to the doctors at Parkland who thought that the hole in the front was an entry wound. If the doctors doing the autopsy had been told, hey, there's a possibility that there was an entry wound in the front, they would have dissected the entire path of that bullet to see if the tissue is pushing from front to back or from back to front. They never did that. The body was sealed in the coffin, put on lying in state, and only then did the two sets of doctors talk to each other, and it was too late to examine him. Because of that one missed communication, we don't have the definitive proof that the hole in the front of his neck was an exit wound.
But our real life is full of miscommunication and foibles all the time. So it's funny when we see these things, we assume everything has to be pre-planned. It couldn't be that. And just to add to Jerry's comment about the fact that declassified holdings haven't shown us exactly what's happened, and that when a foreign government gives us information and we promise to keep it secret forever, that might be the reason why some of these things have not been declassified. But there's a second law. There was a law in 1992 that stipulates that anything that mentions the assassination must be cross-filed into the JFK material. So in CIA, obviously there was such pressure even back then on the agency, like, hey, listen, we have to make sure that, we keep good records of all this stuff. And so they said, if you're anywhere in the world and someone says something about the JFK thing, it has to be cross-filed into the JFK material and files. And the problem then becomes that there's a bunch of sensitive material that has nothing to do with the assassination in these files. For example, when I was in Belgrade in Serbia, I met the former head of the Serbian intelligence service. And as I was sitting down and drinking with him, it turns out he was obsessed with the assassination. And he talked about it for the bulk of the evening of our meeting. So therefore, I wrote up a meeting with the head of the Serbian intelligence service, and I included the JFK discussion. It had nothing to do with the issues we were doing. But then that report gets cross-filed into the JFK material. So when it comes time to release it, they can't release it because it has to deal with sensitive issues going on in Serbia or what have you. But it looks like we were to the outside like, oh, look, they're not giving up this sensitive JFK material. But that's not in fact at all what happened.
Yeah, there's when we're planning our conspiracies, small conspiracies like an operation, right? We always say Murphy gets a vote. And my mind goes back to this one operation we were doing. And it was a small conspiracy. And we had a female, it's a third world country. We had a female officer meeting someone from a radical Arab regime. And he was thinking about, he'd let us know, he was thinking of like telling us what was going on in his government, but he wasn't sure yet. And so they arranged for this walk in this park where they would have a discussion about, and as they were walking through the park, this isolated copse of trees, police jump out, like 5 or 6 police, and they yell, "You're under arrest." And she's thinking, looking at him thinking, oh, he set me up. And he looks at her and thinks, oh, she set me up. And they both looked at each other and realized nobody set anybody up. And they started talking to the police. And I swear to God, what came out of this was the police said, last year on this date, there was a ritual murder, a witchcraft murder in this exact spot. And we have determined that it is likely for occult reasons, this is a country that believes in witchcraft, that the perpetrators would return to this spot, preferably with part of the body that they took. And so they talk back and forth, and the police is like, oh, well, these two clearly are not like involved in witchcraft. And she said, no, he's my tutor. I'm teaching him English. And they went, oh, you can go, but don't tell anybody we're here because we're waiting for the next people to come, And so, we planned everything out to be perfectly done. And then when we had to send it into Washington, it's like, yeah, we didn't think about the occult murder witchcraft angle, right? Which was
It's a
and that
failure of
wrecked our
intelligence.
conspiracy, right?
Yeah.
And of course, Washington then would say, you failed, right? You didn't think of
Yeah.
that, right? It was like,
Right.
no, we didn't. But that's life, right?
Did a rule then get set in place where you had to consider ritual voodoo murders when you plan conspiracy?
Luckily, no. Luckily, we're better than that. The poor FBI, every time there's a mistake, they create an entire administrative rule. It's like it's impossible for them to do anything after a period of years. Interesting. So do you still follow this issue at all, or has coming out of the JFK rabbit hole made you someone who's very, very skeptical of conspiracies in general?
I am now skeptical of most conspiracies because I think that they're much harder to pull off than they are to imagine. I think it's easy to connect dots and claim a conspiracy. I think those things are very hard to pull off, and they're even harder to keep secret. I did stay in the rabbit hole for a while when Vince Bugliosi's book, Reclaiming History, came out, because I think it's brilliant. It's a definitive, exhaustively long examination of every conspiracy theory and every piece of supposed evidence that supports them, where he examines them very carefully and knocks them all down. The questions about, could the bullet do this? Yes, it could. Could Oswald get off this shot? Yes, he could. Does the Zapruder film show that he was shot from the front? No, it actually doesn't. There's all kinds of things he knocks down. For instance, the opening of JFK, the film where the drug-addicted prostitute is thrown out of the car, and she claims there was 2 Cubans on the way to Dallas, and they told me they were going to kill Kennedy. Bugliosi tracks that down. There was a woman who claimed this, but she claimed it after the assassination, not before. The myth was always that it was 2 days before the assassination. She was telling people they're going to kill Kennedy. It was after. And Bugliosi does this to every piece of supposed evidence, and it's authoritative. It's brilliantly done. It's an amazing piece of work. And I at that point I thought, okay, I can stop following this because it's all just nonsense. But
you sound like a recovering alcoholic who's still like,
yeah,
you're still looking at a drink every once in a while going, oh, should I?
I'm a dry drunk at this point. So it's like, I haven't gone through a program, but it's appealing. I understand the appeal of it. It's fun. It's cool. It's cool to say, hey, I know something you don't know. The government was lying about this. Let me spin this tale. And I love a good story. And the assassination conspiracies are really, really compelling, interesting, vital stories. They just happen to be fiction. But I like fiction too.
A good lead into the issue of how hard it would be before the fact to arrange something as opposed to after the fact putting it together. You put together sort of a small example of like, if someone was trying to plan this and someone was querying them, what that might look like. And so you sent that to us, and I was wondering if it would be worthwhile sort of reading that through to try to help make that point.
Sure. The idea is that instead of looking back at the assassination from today, let's put ourselves in the middle of October of 1963. And the 3 of us are sitting together in Dallas. You're my case officers. You're my handlers. You have entrusted me with the planning of the Kennedy assassination. By the way, where would we be meeting? In a hotel room or somebody's house? Where would this take place?
Hotel room would be just fine.
Okay. And I'm going to lay out for you the plan that I've come up with. And I would start by saying, okay, we just got word Kennedy is coming to Dallas in late November, and we're going to kill him. We've got a guy, Lee Harvey Oswald.
And he's a professional assassin?
No, he's just some guy who works in a warehouse.
But he's been a hitman.
No.
Sorry. Okay. So was he? No. I'm pulling this. So was he military?
Yes, he was a Marine.
All right. Well, how'd that work out?
Not so good. He was court-martialed for accidentally shooting himself.
Oh, well, terrific. So has he ever shot anyone? I mean, other than himself?
Well, he shot at someone. Remember, it was all in all the papers earlier this year that someone took a shot at that guy, General Walker?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, that was Lee.
But he missed.
Okay, he missed, but he did shoot at him.
Was it a hard shot?
No, it was actually a pretty easy shot. Walker was sitting in a chair at home. It was nighttime, perfectly lit. Oswald was outside 30 yards away.
Why'd he miss?
Well, he was using this piece of crap mail-order rifle.
Oh, okay. So for Kennedy, we'll get him a really good sniper rifle.
No, he's going to use the same piece of crap mail-order rifle.
Or so, what did he do after the Marines?
He defected to Russia.
I'm sorry. It sounded like you said he defected to Russia.
Yeah, he defected to Russia, but he changed his mind and we let him back.
So the authorities know he defected to Russia and came back to the United States.
Absolutely.
Aren't you a teeny bit concerned that he might be on a watch list or something?
Well, he's on a watch list, all right. It's one of the reasons he's pissed off at the government. The FBI's always coming around, interrogating him, his wife, his family, his friends.
I'm sorry. So why the hell are we using this guy?
Because he works at the Texas School Book Depository.
Ah, so?
So from the 6th floor window, he will have a perfect shot if the presidential limo goes down Elm Street.
What do you mean, if the presidential limo goes down Elm Street?
Well, they haven't announced the president's itinerary yet. They haven't even announced where he's going to speak. And truth be told, there's no reason to believe he'll drive by there. But if he does, pow.
And if the president doesn't drive down Elm Street?
Honestly, we haven't thought about that yet.
Okay, walk me through how this goes down. The morning of the presidential motorcade, Oswald drives to work and...
No. He doesn't drive.
What do you mean?
He doesn't have a car. He doesn't even have a license.
How's he going to get to work?
Probably just hitch a ride with a neighbor.
Okay, so I guess you'll stash the rifle at the building so when he arrives...
No. He's going to carry the rifle with him.
In his neighbor's car?
And the neighbor says, like, hey, Lee, why are you carrying a rifle to work on the day the president is driving by your building?
Oh, come on. He's not going to carry it in the open. What do you think? We're stupid? He's going to wrap it in paper.
Hey, Lee, why are you carrying a rifle-shaped object wrapped in paper on the day the president is driving by?
Well, Mr. Smarty Pants, we actually have an answer for that. He's going to say, it's curtain rods.
Hey, Lee, why are you carrying curtain rods to work?
Okay, that's a good question. I'll run it by Lee. I'm sure he'll think of something.
Good, so he's smart, savvy.
No, he's kind of stupid, but maybe I'll have the guys work on that.
All right, so let me see if I've got this. This not very smart guy, who's not a very good shot, who is being watched by the FBI, is going to position himself to shoot the president if the president drives down that street, which right now we have no reason to believe he will.
That's our plan.
Wow. Then what?
What do you mean?
I mean, after he shoots the president, then what? What's your escape plan? How do you get him away from the scene of the crime? How do you get him out of the city, out of the country? What's the plan?
Well, I think Lee was just, planning to go back to his apartment, maybe take in a movie.
Take in a movie?
I get it. You're worried he's going to get arrested, and if he gets arrested, he could talk, and that could implicate us.
Yes, we are worried about that.
We're worried about that.
Well, don't worry. We're going to kill him.
Well, thank God. That's the first sensible thing you said. You're going to kill him before the police find him.
No. We're going to kill him after the police find him.
But before they interrogate him, right? Before he has a chance to say anything.
No, we're going to let them interrogate him for a few days, and then we're going to kill him.
Where?
Right there in the police station.
Oh, I get it. So one of the cops will say, Oswald grabbed his gun and there was a scuffle.
No. Won't be a cop. We got this guy, Jack Ruby.
And he's a hitman.
No, he owns his strip club.
But he's killed people before.
Jack? No, he's a pussycat.
How is he going to do this?
He's going to walk into that police station, march right up to Oswald, pull out his gun, and bam.
And he can do this without being seen?
Hell no, he's going to do it on live television.
What?
Oh, I get what you're worried about. What if they arrest him? Won't he talk?
Yeah, that's a concern.
Don't worry, we're going to kill him too.
Oh, good, thank you.
Yeah, about 3 years later, we're going to give him cancer.
3 years later?
Too long?
A little.
All right, all right. I sense you're a tiny bit skeptical about Plan A.
A tiny bit?
So let me run Plan B by you.
Please.
In Plan B, Oswald is not the only shooter. He'll be up there on the 6th floor just like Plan A, but we'll also have a real, highly experienced professional assassin. Let's call him Carlos, and he'll be on the grassy knoll.
Good. Okay, now you're talking. What's the grassy knoll?
It's a little slope next to Oswald's building. Carlos will be at the back of the grassy knoll.
Okay, so what's the plan?
The president's limo will drive right past the grassy knoll at a perfect 90-degree angle, and Carlos will shoot him. Then we say, hey, there's a guy in the 6th-story window behind the president with a rifle. Everyone will go after Lee, and he'll take the fall.
I'm sorry. So Carlos is going to shoot Kennedy from the side at almost ground level, but you're going to say the real shooter was 6 stories up and behind?
Yeah, pretty good, huh?
Can't believe I have to ask this, but if Carlos shoots Kennedy from the side and at almost ground level, how are you going to make the wounds look like they came from behind and 6 stories up?
I'll tell you exactly how. Carlos is going to shoot Kennedy in the front of the throat, but he's not going to kill him. So they'll rush him to the hospital, they'll do an emergency tracheotomy, and that will obliterate the entry wound in the front of his throat. But, and here's the brilliant part, Oswald will shoot him in the back of the head at the same time that Carlos shoots him in the front of the throat, so when they do the autopsy, they won't see an entry wound in his throat because it's been obliterated by the tracheotomy. But they will see the entry wound in the back of his head, and they'll say, there was only one assassin, he was the guy shooting from behind, and we pin it on Lee. Pretty good, huh?
Just one thing. If Carlos is shooting from the grassy knoll at a 90-degree angle to Kennedy, in other words, from the side, how does he hit him in the front of the throat?
You are so negative.
All right. So that's our little...
That's pretty much how it could have gone down. It's a dumb plan. I think we can agree on that.
Yeah. So I don't know. The person who planned it got promoted in the KGB or the Cuban military or the CIA or wherever it was.
Or the mafia, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why this is actually, I guess, Jerry and I are concerned about going so deep in the rabbit hole because it becomes such an industry. But if you just go back to the okay, plan this out for me, it all seems to fall apart. All the clever things fall apart pretty quickly.
Yeah. And then if you think specifically about was it the KGB? Was it the mafia? You always have to come back to, would they have hired Lee Harvey Oswald, a guy who failed at everything in his life?
Well, to me, it brings up what's happened recently, efforts to assassinate former President Trump and future President Trump. There's always this concern that, there's assassins or what have you. And these people afterwards, are they working for the deep state or whatever it might be? But they mostly seem like these kind of losers. Mm-hmm. And so afterwards, when they try to create a conspiracy, and they have around the Trump assassination attempt saying, oh, this was the deep state, or it was set up by Trump to make him look good when he put his hand in the air. And again, you go to the same thing. Okay, so you're going to have a camera person at the exact right place at the right time, and the person's going to shoot, but he's going to be on a roof, but nobody's going to see him or stop him, but he's going to shoot, but just hit his ear, even though the president's moving around. All of it falls apart the minute you start thinking logically about these things.
And I find that works with pretty much every conspiracy theory somebody raises to me. I always immediately just go back to, all right, let's see what that looked like, what it sounded like when we were planning it, and always sounds ridiculous.
Phil, I've always wondered, I too like the JFK movie, Oliver Stone's movie, but I always thought it was bunkum, right? Do you know Oliver Stone? I mean, what was his thought process in doing that? Did he believe in the conspiracy theory or that particular conspiracy theory? I know he believes in a lot of them, but you're a Hollywood guy. You probably know Oliver, or at least know people who know him.
I know him a little bit, and I like him, and I think he's a great filmmaker. He does, in fact, believe that Kennedy was killed as a result of an assassination. I think he threw the kitchen sink into the movie to suggest all the different things that might have happened. I don't know that he's saying this is the definitive version of it. I think he tried to put in as much as he could to suggest there's a lot of questions that remain unanswered. And he's right. There are a lot of questions that remain unanswered. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that the Warren Report got wrong or glossed over, and things have been just lost in the noise and lost to history. I remember somebody working on the film telling me, we all feel like it's time that the American public learns the truth about the Kennedy assassination. And I'm all for the American people learning the truth about the Kennedy administration. And I think, having really looked at it a lot, I think as hard as it is to believe, Oswald acted alone. It is wacky that he pulled it off, but it's the least wacky explanation I've heard.
It'd be a pretty crappy movie if the movie was just Oswald got a rifle and shot him, right?
Well, not with a good writer, because he'd have to build the character and what happened. Like, I mean, movies have quite a strong impact on people's belief, not just on the Kennedy assassination, but there's a lot of views people have of history and politics that are based on having watched a movie. You'd like to think all Americans sit and, read all the literature and the books and the research and dig through this stuff. But if you watch a movie that has strong emotional ties, that becomes your view of whatever that episode is.
It becomes a tribal myth
Mm-hmm.
of the culture.
Yeah.
So, Phil, maybe we should do a movie of what we think they actually happened.
It'd be a short.
Are you in?
It's a short. Oswald was couldn't get anything right in his life. He wanted to make a mark. He tried to assassinate General Walker. He failed. His marriage had failed. His wife had thrown him out. He had been fired from job after job. He's working at this building. He hears that the president's going to be driving right by the building next week. And he's got a rifle, and he decides, I'm going to shoot the president.
Broken clock is right twice a day.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah,
saying.
I have a pitch for you, Phil, Hollywood person. I was listening to a podcast recently about 1968, and there's a lot of stuff about 1968 that resonates today. And I was thinking about James Earl Ray, the guy who shot Martin Luther King. Now, he's an interesting, also sort of low-level, criminal in and out of prison and jails and sort of use different aliases. A movie where we follow a man and get to know him for a long period of time. And James Earl Ray didn't use his own name for a long time. And only halfway through the movie did we get to see him actually engage in this thing and we realize, oh my God, who he is. All of a sudden, you're following this guy, you're learning about him, you're getting a sense of who he is, and then boom, this thing happens. And then, if you recall, he then went on the run. He ended up
He went to Canada,
England. He was trying to get to Africa, and he was trying to get to South Africa. He goes to Canada and steals the identity of a Toronto policeman, and he flies to London. He's trying to get to Rhodesia because he wants to be a mercenary in the Rhodesian white area, and he's in London and he robs a bank and a jewelry shop. And I mean, I think it would be actually, you could just take the real story and it'd be actually quite fascinating to follow, and it would be a part of history people have forgotten.
It's a great idea.
All right, let's do that one.
Okay.
So Phil, you did.
Well,
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, Stephen Sondheim wrote a musical called Assassins, in which he brings, John Wilkes Booth and Lee Harvey Oswald and a whole bunch of these people together in one musical. It was not a successful or popular show.
Well, I think we were speaking about conspiracies and myths. There's a view out there that there are professional assassins roaming the earth that can be just found via certain, the dark web or whatever it is. I think one of the little secrets of law enforcement is these professional assassins don't exist. Like there isn't a crew of people who make their living off of killing people. There's crappy low-level criminals who are willing to do something for some money, and maybe get themselves caught. But this notion that there's these incredibly skilled professionals, like in the Day of the Jackal or what have you, I just don't.
Was there a Carlos? Was there Carlos?
He was a terrorist. Yes, he wasn't really a Carlos the Jackal. He had a cool name, but
Different Jackal. Yeah.
When you go through and look at him, it's not. He wasn't any kind of super secret assassin or anything.
But the guy who Day of the Jackal was about, the guy who tried to kill de Gaulle, was that a real
I
person?
don't think so. No.
But there were conspiracies. So go back, de Gaulle gave or withdrew the French from Algeria, where they'd been for 140 years, and inside of 2 months, over 1 million French had to abandon Algeria, where they'd been for generations. And those people, the Pied Noirs, they had put together over and over and over again conspiracies to real conspiracies to kill de Gaulle, and they all failed. I think the book and the movie were great, but there never really was a jackal that the OAS, the underground Pied Noir resistance to de Gaulle. None of them ever panned out. And these people were professional military and French Foreign Legion guys, and they were unable to do it. And if you remember from the movie, at least, the assassination attempt failed because de Gaulle bent over to tie his shoe, right? Welcome to reality again.
Right.
Battle for Algiers is a great film, too.
It really is.
Good films, yeah.
That's great. Ponte Corvo.
Yep. So Stern, are we okay, or do you want us to talk more?
I had one more question. One more question I wanted to throw in for Phil. Sure. So Phil, you famously did Sneakers and about CIA. And I was wondering, what is, now that John and I are, of course, in awe of us, what is your sense of the role of CIA now in U.S. politics? Is it, what is its strengths, its weaknesses? What's your whole sense of it? Having written about it and been a conspiracy theorist and sort of having an understanding of what the agency does, what's your sense of, how would you describe the agency, its positives and negatives?
Well, first, I would say Sneakers is more about the NSA.
That's right.
Okay. Yeah, they're
Some of All Fears, which I directed, is certainly about the CIA.
I stand
My
corrected.
sense, and I, as an outsider, is that the agency has, like everything else in American society, has gone through a lot of changes. I think that in the 50s and 60s, it was probably less bound by laws and rules and was more free flowing. It was the OSS guys who were kind of cowboys in some ways. And I think they way overstepped the bounds. My guess is that today it's much, much, much more difficult for the agency to break the law, and that the role is much more about intelligence gathering than the way the movies depicted it, which is about, cloak and dagger. And you guys, I've learned from you guys that I think the first time we talked and you corrected me, said, we're not CIA agents. We're officers. We're not spies. We recruit spies. We run spies. But we're not out there, with binoculars at the edge of the nuclear base trying to break in. I think it's I actually went to the CIA when we were prepping Some of All Fears and went to the Russia desk. And what really struck me was it looked like it could be the Russian studies office at some mid-sized university. It was a room of desks. All the desks had books and magazines, and everybody had little nesting dolls from their trips to Russia, and everybody had little bottles of vodka. And some of the people were watching Russian cable television, much monitoring television. Others were reading magazines. And I realized this is the unglamorous but most important work that the agency does, which is intelligence gathering. And a lot of that intelligence is gathered from public sources, just watching what's available and saying, oh, that guy didn't used to stand next to that guy. What does that mean? And it was really based on that trip that we added a scene to the movie where they're watching the Russian president in some newsreel footage, and someone says, oh, his jacket isn't fitting well. I wonder if he's like losing weight, and that guy, he was standing next to him at the conference in Vienna. No, that's not that guy. That was a different guy. And it's all these people just arguing as they would in a college dorm.
I think that's fair.
But when we entered that office, as you guys know this, if you walk down the hallway and a door opens, what you see is an interior wall that blocks the view of that room. You have to walk in through the door, walk around this little interior wall to get into the room so that anybody walking down the hall can't see anybody in those rooms. And I thought that was kind of cool.
What's interesting in a certain way is what we're seeing now is in the early days of CIA, when people talked about it was a rogue elephant or it got involved in illegal things or overthrew countries, it was often because it did not have congressional oversight and those type of things. It was essentially a plaything of the president. Eisenhower would just say to the head of CIA, it would really help me if you I'm getting pressure from United Fruit. Can you go into wherever it is, Honduras or something, and overthrow those people? And they just acted on behalf of president's whims. President didn't want to go to the country to try to make a policy. It was too much work. CIA, you can just go do that for us. And what I worry now is newly elected President Trump is he wants an organization that works specifically for him. He doesn't want outside interference. He doesn't want the Congress involved. He doesn't want to have to justify what he's doing. He wants it to be his weapon. And we spent a lot of years, changing, adapting, and reforming the intelligence community to be responsive to the will of the people and the Congress and the president. And I worry we're maybe going back to that old thing.
Years ago, I was researching the Cuban Missile Crisis. I did a huge amount of research into it for a miniseries. And one of the things that really impressed me is that in the summer of 1963, we knew there was a Russian military buildup in Cuba, but everybody said it's not nuclear, including the CIA analysts. But it was the director of Central Intelligence who was the one person who said to Kennedy, I think it's nuclear.
That's right.
And his analysts had told him, no, it's not. And he said, look, I'll let you guys submit your report as it is, but I'm just going to tell the president that I have a different opinion. And it was based on one thing. He said these anti-aircraft emplacements that the Russians are putting in Cuba are all in circles, but there's nothing in the middle of those circles. He said, I think those will someday have nuclear launch pads in the middle of those circular array of anti-aircraft emplacements.
And so they set the U-2s up to go look. That was Director McCone, I think.
Director McCone, who was a Republican Eisenhower administration official. And what's interesting is after he told Kennedy this, and Kennedy said, okay, send up more U-2s, McCone goes to the south of France for his honeymoon. He spends all of August in France. And when he comes back, he says, what have the U-2s found? And they go, oh, well, the weather hasn't been good. We couldn't send them up. And so it's not until the end of September, early October, when the weather clears and they can send U-2s and then also send those low-level fighter photography planes. And that's what comes up with.
And what also happened simultaneously is that clandestine service, the part where Jerry and I worked, had a really successful spy in Moscow, one of our first senior GRU military intelligence spies named Penkovsky, who provided us a lot of the military, books and doctrine. And so we were able to look at how those forces had arrayed themselves and look at their official doctrine and realize, oh my God, this is a setup for a nuclear thing. So the human spy who gave us information allowed the U-2 and others that went over to put those pieces together and realize what was happening there.
Yeah, it was extraordinary. There's a great moment the night that the photo analysts call the National Security Advisor to say there's nuclear emplacements going into Cuba. It's a Sunday night, and McGeorge Bundy is having a cocktail party at his house, and he gets this phone call from someone at CIA. It wasn't the director, it was somebody below him. It's an unsecured phone. And so the guy says, he doesn't say who it is. He says, you know those things we were talking about? And Bundy recognizes the voice and says, yes. And he goes, they're there.
Whoa. That's another movie. We got it. All right.
Yeah.
Well, Phil, it's always fantastic talking to you. We love meeting with you and talking to you, and you've had an incredible career. And little did we know you had this JFK piece. So thank you for spending time with us. And hope to
it's
see you
always
soon.
my pleasure. I always learn so much from talking to you guys.
Thanks so
Thank
much,
you.
Phil.